Kia ora koutou. I'm just going to open up with a karakia and then we'll just launch right in. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atakura he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei mauri ora. Welcome everybody. Kia ora koutou, my name is Dorcas Kays and I am a facilitator on the Masters of Contemporary Education course. This course is in 3 parts, and in part 3, students are required to implement a practice-based change project in their context. It is my pleasure to welcome and introduce to you Eric Pearson, who has recently completed this degree and to graduate in September. Just a bit of background about Eric. He has 21 years plus as a teacher. He's currently in Shirley Boys High in Christchurch. He's taught in his hometown Nelson and he spent 7 years in Abu Dhabi in the Middle East. When he started this course, he was the head of faculty teaching across curricula in physical education and health. He is currently the Director of e-learning and Head of History. His project was generative artificial intelligence in the history classroom, using Gen AI to deepen understanding of the key historical ideas. So on that note, welcome Eric and congratulations on attaining your degree. I'm going to leave you to tell us more about this really interesting project.
Okay, I'm just gonna share my presentation. Let's get this up and running. Okay, if I go. Let's go full screen, it's probably easy. Yeah, that looks good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, ko tātou, ko Mininato Tamonga, ko Waimea Te Awa, no whakatua hou, ko Eric Pearson toku ingoa. So, I'm Eric Pearson, Head of History and Director of E-Learning, Shirley Boys High School on the east side of Christchurch. I consider myself a Nelsonian, but my wife is from Christchurch, so I live in Christchurch. The project, actually I'll go back a slide. When I started thinking about completing my master's, it was in 2023. Our school was piloting the new standards in both PE and in history. And so my original idea was more on curriculum change, curriculum design, but with using AI. 2022, November 2022, ChatGPT came out. So 2023 was, I guess, the brave new world in terms of Gen AI. I started my project with the idea of curriculum design, curriculum change, but pivoted really, really quickly to a real focus on Gen AI. So yeah, history teaching is my passion, but educational technology is also something I'm really keen on. And then I saw that, the ability to be creative, to use technology and new technology, and to teach history. So that was kind of the genesis of my project. What I originally planned was quite a specific focus on Gen AI in the history classroom. What I found was particularly stakeholders like this school, students, even the wider community, wider educational community were more interested. Well, they were interested in the things I was doing in the classroom, but more interested in the impact of Gen AI as a whole. So I've kind of found myself in a position of being able to talk about things like encouraging AI literacy, developing Gen AI policy, the impact on assessments and things like that. So this presentation will be the first part mostly focused on what I did in my project, but also I guess I've got quite a good insight into some of those other areas as well. So in terms of history, there's this really good quote from an author historian, L.P. Hartley. He said, the past is a foreign country, they do things differently there. So one of the first features I discovered with GenAI is the ability to act as, and I started experimenting with this idea of acting or getting the GenAI to act as an historical figure, and students being able to go and have this in-depth conversation with GenAI. So when I'm talking about key historical ideas in history, there's lots of them. Generally speaking, the big six are perspective, using evidence, understanding cause and consequence of historical events, understanding the significance of an event, examining the how things stay the same and how things change over time, continuity and change, and also some ethical issues. Really, for my project though, as I'll talk about, I plan to mostly focus on perspective, so going back in time essentially and talking to historical figures. But with the alignment of the things I was teaching in my classrooms, I also found particularly research was a really big thing, enhancing the research process through the use of GenAI, and also improving students, I guess, writing. So I'll talk about that as well. So my goal, and again, because I'm an historian, I like making parallels to the past. So if you're familiar with the choice of Hercules, Hercules prior to his more famous 12 Tasks of Hercules, he's walking along a road and he comes to a fork in the road, and he meets these two characters, and he kind of has this choice to make about the direction he follows. So at this crossroads, contemplating his future, he's approached by these two beautiful women. One is called Vice, and Vice promises Hercules this life of ease and luxury and immediate gratification. Everything would be easy, everything would be without hardship. Then on the other side is Arete, and Arete, or virtue, has a different path. She says, my path will be difficult, there'll be struggle, hard work, discipline, overcoming adversity will be important. Hercules takes the path of Arete, of virtue, over Kakia, or vice, and there's a really good overlay when thinking about incorporating generative AI in the classroom. So the path of vice, I guess, would be irresponsible and unethical use of Gen AI. So, the seductive path, everything's easy, it will be fast, but we might lead to things like plagiarism, misinformation, malicious use, deep fakes, intellectual stagnation, and things like that. So, the vice path is probably not a good one, but the virtuous path is this idea of responsible and ethical use of generative AI. So it's more effort, it's harder, it requires things like critical thinking, talking about things like accuracy, transparency, that real deeper path of understanding the real positive uses or ethical uses of AI. So that was kind of the frame for my project. Then specifically, so examining the ethical use of AI, but specifically I wanted to explore which prompts would be most effective for use in the classroom, a focus on which tools. So ChatGPT was the most prominent one, but what other tools could be used in the classroom that would be useful. And then teaching boys an academic subject. One of the, I guess, the context which I find myself in, our school was pretty much destroyed in the 2011 earthquake. It's been rebuilt in the modern style. And so we have these open spaces, and as a response to kind of the concerns of noise and chaos in these open spaces, we kind of started device-based learning, and so you get a situation where boys are really calm and quiet, but they're on the devices, and maybe the learning's not that engaging. So I really saw the use of Gen AI as being able to maybe get back to some of the old engaging styles of teaching when I was in these open classrooms. And then that last question, really, I wanted to investigate the educational benefit of using Gen AI. Was it worth it or not? So yeah, specifically focusing on senior history, but what learnings could we gain elsewhere? The benefit, I think, or I guess not so much the primary purpose, but a secondary purpose would be this idea of increasing AI literacy. So what could I do specifically in a history classroom, but generally speaking, how could these ideas help to improve this idea of AI literacy? And the literature is really, really clear on this. As a response to some of those non-virtuous aspects of Gen AI, a possible solution is encouraging everyone to become more AI literate, and that would have these longer lasting benefits. So it would increase ethical use of AI, it would stop some of the negative effects like plagiarism and things like that. What was also really clear in the planning process, talking to stakeholders, was there was a real desire for really clear policy to be developed. It's kind of like the Wild West. So lots of definitely senior leadership in my school, as well as colleagues and even students, were really wanting clarity over what they should and shouldn't be doing with regard to Gen AI. So yeah, that was probably a thing that post-project, or that is the thing post-project that I've spent a lot of my time on, developing and sharing policy and helping people start to use AI in the classroom in ethical ways. So what I ended up doing was breaking my project into 3 phases. So I'll go through these one at a time. Phase 1 was leveraging the idea or the conversational aspect of Gen AI. So this idea that every student could essentially have this one-to-one tutor, and the tutor in the form of AI was programmed to be really conversational, quite engaging. So what I really wanted to do was have my students, when they're using AI or Gen AI, moving from a really transactional approach, like they may have used technology in the past, for example, get a question, go to Google, get an answer, copy it in, to more relational. So encouraging this conversation or dialogue, and you might call that co-construction of knowledge. So students would go to AI, they'd have a question, it could be on anything, and they'd get into the habit of asking a question and then responding and then asking a follow-up question, and therefore that deeper learning starting to happen. What I realized pretty early on was that, again, relied on that skill of Gen AI literacy, in particular a prompting skill. There's lots of different models out there, but we settled on the prompt model. So there's an example there on the screen. Start with a clear question. For example, write a summary of the best way to search for historical sources. Give the AI a role. I think that's really important. So act as high school history teacher, whatever the role is, that's a really powerful prompt to use. Be really explicit in what you require from it. For example, I want easy to follow and understand suggestions, friendly and informative. You can be really explicit on the way you want the AI to respond, and then set parameters. So user informative tone and format as bullet points. So that's an example of something I used in class. Now, as I was researching, one of the first times I explicitly used Gen AI in the classroom, I realized the students weren't really moving from transactional to relational. The second image there's a tool called Brisk AI, and that was, I added a task in there just to help that process of encouraging two-way dialogue. So what happens with Brisk, this is called Brisk Boost. It's a little tool that you can add into Chrome. It's an add-on. You go to like a website, a YouTube clip, a reading, and then the AI will generate, it'll examine the source, then it will generate some learning outcomes. In this case, there was 3, which is the number progress 1, 2, 3, 3 learning outcomes. And then what would happen is the student would look at the source, and then they would start a conversation with the AI. And basically, it's the AI asks questions, student responds, and if the student is able to convince the AI that they have met the learning outcome, they get a little tick. So yeah, I found this a really, definitely in a boys' school, is an unintended consequence, I guess, was when I put the dashboard up like this. I made some notes on there. So if a student hadn't started, it was flagged as not started, and the other boys would call them out and he'd start. So those reluctant starters got started more than normal, maybe. The visual progress was quite good. Boys being a little bit more competitive would, I've got 1 green tick, I need to get more. So the really motivational tool to have up. Cheaters were flagged. So if they copied and pasted, it was flagged. And then you could see if the students didn't quite get the learning outcome, it would be flagged yellow, so I could, give them some extra support. So I only did this for 10 to 15 minutes, and as a starter activity, a kind of catch 'em activity, it was really hard to stop the students once they're in it. The eyes on the screen, they did their reading, they were typing away furiously. So it was actually more of a task to get them back into the normal lesson than a normal starter is. So yeah, there was a really cool segue into encouraging this two-way dialogue, co-construction of knowledge. There's a quote. This is some student feedback. AI was useful when using the correct prompt, especially when I needed it to act as a tutor. So that was student voice. So after they got familiar with interacting with AI, phase 2 was, and this was aligned with the standards I was doing. They were more research-based. So this is probably more a matter of necessity, but found some real good benefit from this. So using Gen AI as a research assistant. So instead of students using, in previous years, they probably would have gone to Google or Wikipedia to find sources for their study. It's evidence, or finding good, reliable, and useful evidence is a cornerstone of what we do in history. So yeah, the quality and the quantity of the evidence my students were getting is much better than I've had in previous years. So when I did this, it was term 1 of this year. I wouldn't use Perplexity anymore, and I'll talk about those reasons in a wee bit. But so we use Perplexity, and as you can see, it's a couple of examples there. The students were looking at first one there, myth of the Moriori, and the real benefit is the openness of the sources. So the student asked the question, and you can see there's 47 sources came up, and then they can start quite easily looking at those sources. In history, there's basically 2 questions you ask. Is this source useful? And that might depend on the question you're asking of it. And probably the bigger question, is it reliable? So they can start straight away looking, well, the first article is a spin-off. Is that as reliable as the second one, which is an AC, an academic article? And they can start easily making some of those distinctions, not using ones that would be deemed to be less useful and less reliable. Then what we also looked at was, so that's, I guess, the first one, searching with AI, getting lots of sources, making those evaluations of usefulness and reliability. And then the second screenshot there is the students started using Gen AI to evaluate and analyze the evidence. Again, a key part of good historiography. So in that example, the students had found some useful information. It was a deed of settlement by the look of it. So from memory, is close to 100 pages long. And so they uploaded 2 sources, and then the prompt the student used, this is student evidence here, act as an historian investigating the myth of the Moriori. I want you to highlight the key historical ideas of cause, perspective, and significance. Use detailed notes and format as bullet points. So again, using that prompt, the prep prompting model, being really explicit on what they wanted. They wanted to find the key historical idea of cause, perspective, and significance. Yeah, and I would judge the quality and quantity of sources my students use this year has far exceeded previous years. Then, as the term progressed, the students would figured out how to prompt, we'd figured out how to find evidence. They had to start writing up their assignments. So I did this with a level 2 and a level 3 history class. Then what we started looking at, again, this idea of promoting ethical use of AI. So phase 3 was using Gen AI as a writing coach. So the model that we use there, again, it's following that prep, provide feedback on a draft assessment, act as a writing coach offering constructive feedback. I want you to check if and this is directly from the standard, if I've presented well-considered judgments on the key historical ideas, comments, and made comments from a historian's perspective. So that's directly from the rubric. Use detailed notes and format as bullet points. I bolded that last bit, give advice only, do not rewrite. That was part of my teaching process, I guess, really encouraging, don't rewrite, don't use the AI to do the work for you, use it to improve the quality of your work. So yeah, this one I felt was a really important way of addressing that issue that a lot of teachers are having of students passing off AI work as their own. It's not a 100% foolproof solution, but it's really promoting that ethical use of AI. So use it to enhance your work, don't use it to replace things like writing your own answers. One of the issues, which is one that I've kind of developed my thinking on over time, the issue of data sovereignty. So again, that's part of understanding AI literacy. So when you upload your work to a tool like a free tool, particularly ChatGPT or Perplexity, if you don't take any precautions, that data sovereignty is lost. So that was a good teaching point. My policy now is to not use those free tools, and I'll talk about that towards the end, but I would only encourage them to use Gemini and Copilot because the data is, in an education account, is ring-fenced. So when I was doing my action research in term 1, most of the literature review was quite positive on the generally speaking, the positive outcomes of Gen AI. There wasn't a lot of negatives. In was it June? Yeah, probably June this year. June or July? June. There was a relatively large report released by MIT looking at essentially brain scans of people who were relying entirely on Gen AI to do writing for them. So yeah, that kind of, there's more evidence now that students who are not writing are not doing themselves any favors, and that MIT study was a really good part of that. So yeah, my recommendation for both formative and summative is Gen AI should not be used for writing, and that's a really hard thing for students to overcome. There's really good student voice there. A student uses AI and it offers really good negatives. It's not very well phrased, but negatives is that it's sometimes hard to not copy off what AI says. They give really good answers. So that is a real concern from students. It is really tempting. And again, I picture that student in that first slide on the vice or virtue. That voice of vice is pretty tempting for our students. So there's no easy solution to that. In phase 4, this is the one that was more my main idea, more thing I'm really passionate about. So using Gen AI to explore historical perspective. And really it's an analogy of time travel. So using that act as function of Gen AI, getting it to act as an historical figure, then the students having a conversation, two-way dialogue with an historical figure. So you can see the example there. I've got a few examples, but yeah, I found this, and the students found this really, really engaging, a really, I guess, different way of using the technology. So yeah, co-constructed, I guess, the prompt, act as an historical figure, having a conversation with a history student was the prompt, etc., etc. The phrases in there, your goal is to help me understand the perspective, values, beliefs, motivations, reasons why they acted the way they did. That's actually from one of the achievement standards focusing on the key historical idea of perspective. So this is some student feedback. I think talking to a character which you can actively receive responses from is far more insightful than reading information. So prior to GenAI, if my students were trying to figure out the perspective of someone like Nicholas II, they would have to do something like read biography or autobiography and kind of infer a lot of information. So by being able to have a direct conversation with Nicholas II, they found it way more engaging, but also part of my research was to get the students to submit the dialogue they had with the GenAI. So I was able to analyze textual analysis of the questions they were asking, but also the responses from the AI. So the next few slides are some examples. This is a little bit controversial. So applying this to a New Zealand context, and I've read quite widely and had lots of different conversations around this. There is a school of thought that in terms of cultural responsiveness, the words of someone like Dame Whina Cooper are a taonga, a treasure, and they shouldn't be used. And then the other side of the argument is, well, they're not really her words. They're statistically the most likely things she would have said based on everything that's published. So this is a tricky area, but I included this because I think that the learning is, and again, depending how it's prompted, it's really deep learning. So this student, non-Māori student, was learning about Dame Whina Cooper, and you can see the AI's response. Kia ora, I'm Dame Whina Cooper. It's quite friendly and informative. It's a pleasure to sit with you today. This is this idea of a relational use of the Gen AI. And the student started asking some specific questions. We're looking at the 1975 Land March. How did you show mana on the hikoi? That was directly related to the prior learning we've done. You can see the responses as friendly and informative. Kia ora, I love that you're asking how I showed mana on the hikoi. It's got the factual side of things that are really important in the study of history. So I was 79, started in the north in Te Hapua, etc., etc. So in terms of pure historiography, the factual side of things is good. And then we start getting these really interesting questions. So this student, again, non-Māori student, asked the question, why do I feel guilty about colonization? And to me, this is a year 12 student, that's a great question. But then you start looking at the answer. So kia ora, my young friend, I'm glad you're sharing what's on your heart. It's a big thing to wrestle with. I'll sit with you like I would with anyone asking the tough questions back in my day. And you can see the answers, I think, are really, really deep learning, really educational. And then what we figured, and there's a few instances of this, but in terms of that time travel analogy, yes, the students could go back in time, but they, I guess you might call this transformational use of the technology. They're no longer confined to that timeline. So this was in early this year. The student asked, what about the Treaty Principles Bill? And that was obviously in the news at the time. So kia ora again. As Whina Cooper, I'll talk to you about this treaty. I reckon you're asking something that's been stirring up a lot of kōrero in New Zealand. Let's dive in. So yeah, that was really cool learning. Go back in time and talk to an historical figure, but then that historical figure comes to the present day and is able to give really detailed and nuanced answers. The technical side of that, there's a process called retrieval augmented generation. So a large language model is always cut off at a certain point in time, but to be more accurate, it will augment its response. For example, I think this chat we used Grok, and it's sourced from, for example, David Seymour's tweets or tweets on X. So yeah, it was able to source most up-to-date information and give pretty detailed answers. So yeah, what I found, again, the data, I had kind of three forms of data. There was a Pre-test data, post-intervention data, which is shown here. I also collected all the students' responses or chats with the AI to examine both the questions the students were asking and the responses from the AI to check if they're accurate and useful. And also, as I was taking out these interventions, I was making notes. So, conversations, for example, when we did the activity talking historical figures, there's real robust debate over. Some students could clearly imagine they were talking to an historical figure. Others, you talk about, well, you're not actually talking to Dame Whina Cooper, you're talking to the AI, and it's not actually her words, it's the statistically most likely thing she would say. So understanding the algorithm as well. End result, though, I think is students found it really, really engaging. You can see there's quite a clear shift in here. That was one of the questions I asked was, is a Gen AI an engaging way to learn? There was definitely a strong shift there. The students seem to pick up on this idea of Gen AI as a one-to-one tutor, being able to use it at any time for any subject. It's always available, and it's conversational, and it increases access to information. Having good literacy, though, I think is a really important part as well. So once the students figured out how to prompt, give them that prep model, go through several examples, you could use my prompt or you could develop your own. Again, as they got used to prompting and used to conversing with AI, there was some really rich and deep learning there. So yeah, in terms of my goals, definitely there was a clear consensus that the students found it engaging, particularly that idea of talking with historical figures. They definitely found that their literacy improved. They definitely found that things like research was probably enhanced with using Gen AI. Some of the things that harder to measure, harder to, I guess, get a good gauge on was, do students see the ethics side of things? Get a good quote there. The student was pretty articulate. AI is good for research. I can use it as a writing coach, but I'm worried about how much we use it. Yeah, issues of plagiarism. Well, yeah, one of the actually interesting stats I looked at, I got students to estimate how much they were using AI and how much their peers were using AI. They were like, all my colleagues, all my peers are 100% using AI all the time, but I'm not using it as much. So there's quite a disconnect there, which is interesting. So in terms of my conclusions, things like research, this wasn't a specific focus, but it's something I found out. There was a clear benefit to students starting to access information in ways they haven't before. So yeah, I think that's a real positive use. Any subject that requires research, using AI, Gen AI for that would be really useful. Definitely I found I don't use Gen AI a lot. In a typical lesson, maybe I'd use it for a starter, 10 to 15 minutes max. But the students found it very effective and very engaging. Yeah, and then this really creative use of the technology, I think, is cool. My next evolution will be, so instead of having a text-based conversation, they'll be able to have a verbal conversation. So I've already experimented with talking to Nicholas II in a Russian accent, that sort of thing. But eventually, so if we assume that text to video will be a thing, a lot of history is text-based, so a lot of really descriptive or really good, rich descriptions of historical events could be converted to video. Students will put virtual goggles on and they'll be able to really fully immerse themselves into a virtual past. They can go back in time, have conversations with these characters. And then that idea of, well, I could bring Nicholas II into the present and talk about, actually one of the questions we had, students were asking what Nicholas II thought of Vladimir Putin, for example. So outside of timeline, yeah, I think really engaging use of the technology. In terms of insights, I still think the Betty Crocker analogy, or maybe the IKEA analogy, holds true. The human element is still really, really important. So students don't seem to like, if you had 100% AI lesson, they wouldn't like that. So the Betty Crocker analogy is the cakes that Betty Crocker made that required no human involvement didn't sell very well. As soon as people had to measure stuff and maybe add an egg, they sold better. The same principle with IKEA. IKEA is a massive furniture maker, and you have to make it yourself. So that analogy, I think, is really important in education. The horrible situation would be students or teachers creating resources on AI, students doing it on AI, teachers marking with AI, reporting with AI. I think that's the wrong path, which is kind of my next point. The virtuous path will be the most rewarding, but it's harder. So thinking of ways that we can use AI ethically, not just going straight to the tool and getting it to create resources, but yeah, I think that's the wrong path. The harder path will be the more rewarding. That will require good AI literacy from teachers, and that will rub off on students. The evolution of models is really, really rapid. So when I did my research, I used ChatGPT and Perplexity. Now so when we did it in our school, we didn't have Gemini turned on. I had to get permission to ChatGPT. If you're between 13 and 18, you need parental permission. Microsoft Copilot and Gemini have solved that issue. They've solved the issue of data sovereignty as well. So yeah, what I did in term one, I wouldn't do now. I've lots of different things I do. One phrase I heard about that is, today is the worst AI will ever be. The models will only ever get better, but there's a little asterisk there that might depend on your perspective. Some will say that the path we're going down, vice path, might not be good. But yeah, what we can do will only ever get better. In terms of being a teacher, my opinion is if you figure out how to prompt, there's less need to get all these other tools that people try and sell you. If you figure out how to prompt the AI, essentially you can do anything that a lot of these other paid for subscription things will do. And the same will be for students as well. If they can effectively prompt the AI, they're going to be really, really powerful as they move on. And then and this is what I've been getting into recently, the Gen AI is almost old hat now. The next evolution is going to be something called agentic AI, so using AI as an agent. For example, I had a staff only day last week, and talked about creating an AI agent for a specific standard. So if one of the issues of authenticity is we're not sure of the information we can get, by programming by creating an agent, you can put all the knowledge and information you want into that agent, so therefore it becomes more accurate because it's only trained on the data that you're giving it. So kind of like creating a small language model might be the analogy there. So yeah, agentic AI, I think that is going to be the next thing that's both definitely for teachers, but also for students. So in terms of, that's kind of my study. In terms of where I've got to, what I've found is there's lots of people asking for recommendations, what I recommend if they were starting to use AI. So the considerations would be age restrictions. So generally speaking, not below 13, parental permission between 13 and 18, data sovereignty, any free model that data is being used, or you are, if you don't pay for something, you are the product, I think the saying is. So if you are starting to use AI in the classroom, you need to be aware of that, age restrictions and data sovereignty. Accuracy and bias is a clear issue, but I think is getting better. So for example, with retrieval augmented generation, it's 5 lines of code that can increase the accuracy in the models. If you are encouraged, or if you're improving your AI literacy, understanding of the bias in the models is able to be overcome. An example in my, I guess, research, students asked if they had a really basic prompt, they would, we actually tried this, act as Hitler, and the AI model wouldn't do it. Act as Chairman Mao, it would. So there's a clear bias, like fascism is bad, but socialism is okay. So really good, useful teaching moments there in terms of history. So what's wrong with fascism? Did Hitler kill more people than Mao? No. So why is one okay, one is not? Think about the left-leaning models of Silicon Valley. Yeah, so really good learning there. Authenticity and assessment, I think, is a real big issue, and that's what a lot of teachers have. So my solutions, and in brackets, they don't completely solve things. For age restrictions and data sovereignty in a New Zealand context would be to use Microsoft Copilot or Google Gemini. And the reason is most secondary schools have, the government pays for education level accounts. So you don't have to pay anything extra. Neither of those models, and this changed this year, require an age, so it will still be restricted under 13, but 13 and 18, you don't need any parental permission. Data sovereignty would be the big one. So both Microsoft and both Gemini will ring fence the data. The Google guy will tell you lots of different regulations they have to meet. In terms of accuracy and bias, using tools like NotebookLM, where you can put data in and the students will only converse with the data you approve. Creating agents will also, I guess, increase the accuracy. The main solutions, though, is this idea of encouraging AI literacy. So both staff and students becoming more, there's that virtuous path, understanding the correct way to use AI will mitigate some of those negative, particularly around copying and plagiarism. But also developing really clear policy. Students can do this, students cannot do that. In NCA, for example, students cannot use AI, Gen AI in external assessments at all, but they may be able to use it in some aspects of internal assessments. So clarifying that with really clear policy, I think, is another useful way of looking at things. And that's probably me.
Nice work, Eric. You've covered a lot of some of the questions I was going to ask you, but you've covered it nicely with some challenges that present itself, some opportunities, and certainly strengths, but weaknesses also. A nice balanced argument that you've presented with possible solutions. Edna, are there any questions that have come through the chat that you might want Eric to address?
No questions so far, Dora, but if anyone has questions, feel free to pop them in the chat.
Yeah, so one of the real challenges I've found is even going back and reading my project report. So, why did I do it that way? Like the evolution of what you can do, and I guess even understanding of my understanding of how prompting works. It's like, why did I do it that way? Why didn't I do it this way? But yeah, I think I'm really excited about agentic AI. Salman Khan had this, so ChatGPT came out in November 2022. He did this TED talk, I think it was February. Basically, Gen AI is going to have the biggest positive transformational change education's ever seen, and it would be every student would have a one-to-one tutor, so that personalization of education, that 24-hour access to knowledge in a really conversational way, but also every teacher is going to have this really high-powered personal assistant. So I think even though time has gone along, those two ideas, if people are starting to think of using Gen AI, think of it like that. So every student with this one-to-one tutor that can personalize their educational experience, and then every teacher having this personal assistant that can streamline all of these, the boring aspects of our job, I guess, creating resources. Yeah, I think that's a really good thesis. That's kind of what I base my ideas on still.
Sounds like a doctorate.
Well, it was interesting. The Minister of Education talking about New Zealand being world leading in AI marking of NCA, for example. I think it would be awesome if, to mitigate all those problems with cheating and plagiarism, students have essentially a two-way conversation with an AI, and they would keep conversing until, kind of like the Brisk Boost idea, this AI would keep asking questions, clarifying, and it would be able to figure, well, this is your level of understanding of this topic. So it could be typed, it could be a verbal conversation. You could have a NZQA avatar, and just converse, and that old Socratic method, I guess. I think that would be pretty cool.
Okay. Geez, Eric, lots to think about, right? I think you've done some great stuff here.
Oh, it's been awesome. Yeah, really good.
Are you okay if we close off?
Absolutely. No questions coming through.
Eric, thank you again for sharing your project with our wider audience. It's so good to hear your experiences with Gen AI, and somebody who's down on the ground doing the mahi, is in the context and can be able to speak the same language that we all understand. So again, congratulations on completing your degree, and thank you for presenting to us today. I'll finish off with a karakia. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou ariki a ihu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake a mene.